Attention, attention please. Stand by for another episode of
When Humanists Attack.
Hi, this is Chris West with When Humanists Attack. Today we're going to be sitting around and talking with Daniel Mann. When you were telling your story, because you said you had a lot of miraculous experiences, what I was asking myself internally was, what is a miracle? The definition of what a miracle is important here, because I don't necessarily maybe have the same definition as you do. So why don't you tell me what, under those circumstances, it is a miracle from your point of view?
Something that a naturalistic explanation cannot account for.
That's a really nice definition. The things that you've explained to me as being interpreted by you as miracles are just, for me, wild coincidences at the worst. I think that a number of people picking you up to go for your visit with a surgeon is not what I would bring to the level of miraculous in that same sense. I would say, wow, that's an amazing coincidence. And that coincidence can be explained that God was playing around with what was going on there and asked that man to stop for you. And even though he didn't understand it, or it was someone who, for his own reasons, was like, I've never picked up a hitchhiker. This guy doesn't look threatening. I don't know why I'm going to stop. I'm just going to do it. And that seems to me to be a naturalistic event that you're giving supernatural importance to. That seems to me not to be miraculous, even though it can be seen as being miraculous. I would also say the warm feeling of feeling like you've been hugged is something that I've experienced. It's not necessary to have a supernatural explanation in order to have that type of emotions in that environment.
What type of event or miraculous event might convince you that God is real or that Jesus is real? Can you give me one such piece of evidence or event?
I cannot tell you what I would need as far as evidence to prove to me something that would be sufficient for me to believe that God or Jesus are real and extant, because I haven't experienced it yet. A number of things could be events that I would experience, but to then go ahead and take the experience and say that the reason that experience happened was because of this other thing, that there's so many possibilities for me as to what the reasons would be, including I don't know, which are more satisfying to me than attributing it to something that I have no evidence for in my own life. I spent 20 odd years searching for the supernatural in a very overt way. I still find the evidence that I've been able to interact with lacking. So if I was to see an apparition and that apparition looked like Jesus and I had an interaction with that, my first response would be what you were saying. Am I nuts? What is going on inside my brain that would make that happen? I would not automatically jump to a supernatural cause. And even before I went to a supernatural cause, I would need some kind of confirmation that the supernatural even exists. Even if I were to become convinced that there was a God and that Jesus was true, based on what I know of the belief structure around them and what I know of the Bible, I don't think I'd be willing to worship him. Matt Dillahunty said it best when he said, if God is all-knowing, then God would know what I need in order to believe. And if he really wanted me, first of all, if it's a he, but if he really wanted me to have that experience, then I think that I'm worthy of a Damascus Road experience, just like Paul.
I think you cut the ground out from underneath you with your answer, because what you're saying, in essence, is no matter what miracle or how many miracles that I present to you, your worldview will exclude the possibility that these are miracles.
Well, I didn't quite say that. I'm open to the idea. I'm not cutting out the idea that there's a supernatural. I just haven't experienced it or seen it. And I can't tell you what would convince me, because what I've seen would convince a lot of people and didn't convince me.
What type of miracle can I present to you then that might convince you or even begin to for you to consider that this might be a miracle?
Well, I think very clearly, for my definition, a miracle would have to suspend the natural laws. That would be one of the minimum things that a miracle would have to do. Um, and within that, I'd have to be able to confirm that it wasn't just some super advanced group of people from another planet, just as Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced culture is indistinguishable from magic or the supernatural to people who aren't aware of the science behind it. So it's possible that I would be able to get behind the event and come to the idea that it was supernatural. But then I come back to you with another question, which is, even if it was possible to convince me that the supernatural exists, where is the difference in why your particular take on the supernatural is the one that I should go with?
It sounds like you're still saying that if Jesus appeared to you and said, "Hey, Chris, what the heck's the matter with you? Here I am, I'm appearing to you, and you're refusing whatever I show you, you're refusing to recognize this as a miracle." That's what it sounds like you're saying.
What I'm saying is, if God is all knowing and all powerful, God knows what I need and would give that to me if he really wanted me to know him.
From a biblical point of view, and this is highly offensive. Yeah, are you ready for something
Oh,
highly offensive from a biblical point of view?
please offend me.
Okay. From a biblical point of view, all the evidence in the world is out there already. From arguments of design, cosmology, first cause, all sorts of considerations. The reason the Bible is consistent about this, the reason that people don't believe, is not because the evidence isn't present, but there is something in us, and I recognize that in myself too, that doesn't want to believe because it represents a surrender of our autonomy, and it also represents something even more threatening. The Bible also says something that I think is so darn life controlling. Like, think of the phenomena in life that we're always trying to prove ourselves and look good. Now, you guys might be an exception because you like to be humble and you like to laugh at yourself and admit your foibles. And I really respect that. And I've always respected that about Vincent too. And I know how difficult that can be, really confronting yourself. But I think if we really confront ourselves, we have to confront what is it that motivates us to always justify ourselves, to prove ourselves, to impress people with our accomplishments or our power, or money, or popularity, or whatever form it might take. And that's because deep down inside we do not feel okay about ourselves. Why do we not feel okay about ourselves? Now, this is a Christian interpretation now.
Okay.
We don't feel okay about ourselves to varying degrees because we know that there is something not okay about us.
And
What
that,
is not
yeah, what is not okay?
the fact that we are morally corrupt at our very core. And that not only that, but it goes even deeper than that, I think, that we know that we deserve the judgment of God. We know that we are failures, and we spend our life trying to prove that we are not moral failures, that we are not corrupt, that we are okay and that we are worthy human beings.
So I don't disagree with the first part of what you said. I think that people are constantly looking for why they fit in and how they fit in. But I think that's not driven by some kind of moral corruption, because I don't necessarily believe that the Bible is a moral authority. I personally feel that that's because we're social animals, and part of our programming is to need to be accepted in order to survive. And I think that that's been borne out through the studies of psychology and animal behavior. And I don't think it's a mystery that we need to fit in. There are plenty of creatures that don't need to fit in. We look at tigers. Tigers are hanging out with their best buddies until they're old enough, and then they need their own territory. Tigers wouldn't have that problem. We, however, are one of the most helpless creatures for the first 7, 10, 15 years of our lives. We're completely dependent on the families around us and the environments that are shaping us. And in that, we seek to belong. And our fitting in or not fitting in depends on our personality and the demands of the society we're in. But I don't ascribe that to some kind of failure or deep within us that's marked on us from birth. I just don't believe that.
Well, let me throw in some other phenomena that I don't think that your naturalistic scenario can explain.
Sure.
For instance, the fact that whatever we do, whenever we have a conflict with somebody else, we got to prove that we are right and the other person is wrong. That goes against social cohesion. Another phenomenon.
No, I don't agree with that. I think, first of all, I don't think that it just follows that people need to be right. People like to be right. And I think it is the indication of someone being rather well rounded as a person that they don't always have to be right. I think that striving to be right is striving to fit into the code of the group that we're in. And what's right depends on where we are. There are some very basic rights, things that are right. Like every society believes that murder is wrong, with or without the Bible. So I don't necessarily agree with your premise. I think that we strive to be right because one of the things that we want to do as creatures is to live in truth, right? You're trying to find truth. I'm trying to find truth. We want to be right because we want our worldview to align with what we consider reality to be. Now, your reality is slightly different from mine, and what you're going to strive for to meet that reality is different from mine. But we're both striving to be right within our worldview.
And I respect that. And I really respect anybody who's searching for the truth. But I think the history of mankind demonstrates that that's not our first goal. Our first goal is not to think correctly, but to feel good about ourselves. And that helps to explain why we are in denial about so many things, why we have all these various defense mechanisms that it seems that we can't even get beyond. Because this need, and I think it's great to strive to be right and to fit in, but what we find about ourselves is that we are in denial of the wrong that we do, and we try to justify that wrong and even blame it on other people.
I do not disagree at all that there are lots of ways that we find to get around feeling bad about what we do if we do something bad.
But I think the phenomena still remains. The phenomena is that we are in denial, and our denial causes all sorts of interpersonal problems, things that go against the welfare of the community. And so you can't really appeal to evolution to say, well, we evolved this way because we had to for social reasons.
I don't necessarily feel that that argument follows. I think that evolution perfectly well describes the need for all of these interpersonal, both the good and the bad parts of it. I believe that the problems that you have when you're interacting with other people is a part of the mess that biology gives us. And when we're able to navigate that in a way that people come out being whole, feeling well, feeling loved, then we've done it well. And when it doesn't, then we do it badly.
If you're coming from an evolutionary, naturalistic point of view, what you have to demonstrate is that somehow this pervasive denial that the human race experiences really has adaptive value. And I don't know that
Absolutely.
the denial has adaptive value.
Absolutely. Denial is one of the ways that we deal with cognitive dissonance that we can't handle, the repression of horrible memories. This is an adaptive way that we have to get through the day. It may not be perfect, and it may not end up being healthy in the end in every instance, but it's also not unhealthy in every instance either. It's kind of, in my opinion, kind of a middle thing. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It is messy, and that mess is not because of some original sin, in my personal point of view and opinion, but just because it wasn't created by anyone. It's just this stuff, having go in the petri dish.
Okay, let me go on to another form of evidence against a naturalistic explanation.
Sure.
And that is, what do you call it? Masochism, that we harm ourselves. Now, what do we harm ourselves? Now, Christianity has a perfectly good explanation for it. We sense, we intuit that we deserve to be punished. That's the basic paradigm.
Okay.
That we have a sense that we know that we are morally deserving of punishment. And what the masochist does is he understands that and he punishes himself in order to get some moments of relief from the stress and the guilt. And he's able to enjoy himself for a little bit. But it's something that doesn't really touch the problem because he's got to keep on punishing himself. It demonstrates that there is an awareness within us and a behavior and a resulting behavior that naturalism, I don't think, has an adequate explanation for.
So I'll start off with my answer by saying I'm not a psychologist, right? I don't understand, or a psychiatrist. I'm not steeped in the deep underlying psychology of a masochist or a sadist. I'm also don't think that there's anything supernatural about it either. I think that the naturalistic explanation of these, which I would have to go to a psychiatrist or psychologist to get a good understanding of, perfectly fits in with other types of psychological problems. The brain is a messy place, and sometimes the desire to become a member of society, someone imprints that hurting themselves is the way to get that. Whether that is biologically set off from as a child or part of the coping strategies that person came up with in the environment that they grew up in, I don't see a supernatural agent necessary for any of that. How do you describe why and how mental illness exists from a spiritual or a supernatural point of view?
I see mental illness as cognitive distortion.
Sure, but that's a completely naturalistic way of looking at it, or do I have that right? Is there a way to look at that not naturalistic that I'm not getting?
Yeah. Now we can take it to a deeper level now, because we all agree there, and that's something that I've enjoyed. The conversation as I've had with Vincent, because Vincent, I know, is devoted to the truth, especially learning the truth about himself, and I think that's very essential, very necessary for the human condition. I mean, to really because how are we going to manage ourselves well if we don't understand ourselves? And so, but the question is, where does this cognitive distortion come from? And so my Christian understanding would be an alienation, not only from God, but an alienation from ourself that results in all sorts of suppression, repression, denial, self-justification, building self-esteem, and all that other stuff.
I don't think that the evidence bears that out. I think that what you're doing is you're taking an observation of an effect of the cognitive dissonance, and you're fitting it into your worldview. Because if I were to ask a Hindu why people are crazy, there are paths in Hinduism where going crazy is the path to wisdom. You have these people who spend the aesthetics, right? They spend years and years living on the street, what most people would consider to be a rather crazy way to live. That is something where we just have to agree to disagree on the source there, because I don't think that just claiming that it's because of some kind of break with the root of what I should be seeking as wholeness with God, just claiming it doesn't make it true for me. And you may have scripture that backs that up, which is a perfectly sound way from your point of view to justify things. But it isn't for me, because I've done a lot of reading of your blog. And one of the things I noticed in your blog is, and I read half of one of your books.
Which one, by the way? Just
which one was it? The one about apologetics, right?
Why believe the Bible's
yeah, why the believe Bible, right? And you're very well versed in the Bible, and I'm not. I'll just put it out there. I do not have a reason to believe that the Bible is anything more than a book of stories. I don't believe it's the inspired word of God, and I don't believe it's inerrant. So I have a problem using the Bible as a source of truth, anything more than what I'd put on Aesop's Fables, because Aesop's Fables is also full of truth, but it is not purporting to be, the inerrant word of the creator of all of us and the overseer of us and that type of thing. Do I have it right that you believe in the inerrancy of the Bible?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give me a little bit of understanding about why you feel that way when people can point out obvious inconsistencies in the Bible where it's inconsistent with itself?
I would be glad to admit that there are areas in the Bible that I struggle to reconcile. There's some very difficult things there. And so I still believe in inerrancy, even though I can't get my mind around everything. Why do I believe in inerrancy? Because it's something that Jesus consistently taught, not using that word, but he consistently taught that this is the word of God. And man must live not by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Now, why should I believe in what Jesus said? Well, he provided a lot of proof that he is actually from God. One set of proofs is through his miracles. Why believe his miracles? Well, there's a lot of substantiation for his miracles from the most unlikely sources.
Help me out. Give me a source. Give me a non-biblical source.
The Talmud makes many references to the fact that Jesus was a miracle worker, but yet they're not a friend of Jesus because they claim that he worked his miracles by the power of Satan.
I did read that in one of your posts, and I did read that in your book as well. We have no eyewitness accounts of any of this. The synoptic books of the Bible, the Gospels are anonymously written. The only author that we have any kind of surety about is Paul, and we have the Pauline letters, and we have something like 13 of them, 7 of which have been attributed to Paul himself, and the other 5, depending on who you ask, but 5 or 6 are questionable in authorship. And I was just wanting to know who do you think wrote the synoptic Gospels? Matthew, Luke, John, and...
Well, you're right, Chris, that there's no name attached to any of the 4 Gospels, but some people legitimately make the case that this makes them seem more genuine, because the people who wrote these things weren't trying to make a point. They weren't trying to win a following by saying, oh, this came from John, or this came from Paul or Luke or anybody. These people who wrote these gospels were very self-effacing, it seemed like. And they couldn't claim that this was the gospel of John or Mark or Matthew. They couldn't do that, because this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Now, about the authorship of the Gospel of John, why do I believe it's by John? Because that is the universal testimony of the early church. And I think they know better than Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman may be one of the sources that I go to for this, but he certainly represents the majority of New Testament scholars on the subject. The earliest, best Bible version of Luke that we have, which has the empty tomb story, doesn't include anything past the three women showing up. The appearance to the apostles after that is apparently, from looking at Bibles from before when that wasn't in there, and later added in the Middle Ages. Now, that could have been inspired as well, but it does seem to me that having that kind of evidence from the study of the text as a text, not as the Word of God, that should have some merit and bring some questions to that skepticism.
You're raising a legitimate question. And that question is, the ending of Mark, it seems to have been a later addition. That's the way it seems like from the evidence that we have on hand right now. But does this mean that there's something illegitimate about the rest of the Gospel of Mark? I don't think you can make that jump.
We have no original documents, and we don't know who wrote these. We do know that the early Christians, as converted by Paul in his missions, were upper class Greek in major city centers. They were literate, and the entire New Testament is written in Greek, right? So we and one of the way you phrased it more than once, saying they're written in a way that makes them seem, and that is kind of loose language for me. When somebody is claiming to have the word of the creator of everything, if the veracity is in question, then seeming doesn't seem to be a very high bar.
Well, the only thing that we're addressing right now is the authorship.
Okay.
And so that's the area that you attacked and acknowledged. I acknowledge that many other people attack it. The fact that their names aren't attached to the gospel means that they weren't trying to get over on anybody saying, oh, you can believe this because this was written by an apostle. It seems instead that they were very self-effacing. That's what it seemed like.
I would read the same thing and just come away with a different opinion. It seems very much like they're trying to sell the idea that Christ was the Son of God and that he is the person who, if you were to read the rest of this chapter in this book, that these are the words of this Savior and I should listen to them and live my life by them.
Even Barton acknowledges that if you want to know anything about the life of Jesus, he says, go to the 4 canonical Gospels. That's what he claims.
Yep.
And he also claims that it's not just his opinion, but it's the opinion of countless historians and New Testament experts. And so what we're saying here is that there are compelling reasons to ascribe the traditional authorship to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why are they reluctant to? There's only one reason why they're reluctant to. They prefer to put a later date on John, like around 90 or 100 AD, that would kind of indicate that John probably wasn't alive at that time, because that is like 90, that would be maybe 60 years after the cross. And so they don't want to believe that, because they would rather believe that it's written not by an eyewitness, which would make it more credible. but believing that it was written by somebody else. But yet, I think if you look at the textual evidence of the Gospel of John, that there are good reasons to believe that it was written much earlier, like say between 60 and 65 AD.
I appreciate the reason that you're making the 65 number there, because it's really important for all of that to have been written before the fall of the temple in Jerusalem. If it was written in 90, then it can't be a prophecy that came true. And I appreciate that. That's an important proof. So it's kind of important to know whether or not that was one place or the other. I don't think we're ever going to get there. I don't think there's enough evidence from a historian's point of view, like Bart Ehrman or another biblical historian, to accurately place that marker one place or the other. To have metrics, we need to agree that it's a metric that would work here and would work other places. And I'm not a New Testament historian myself. I'm leaning on the shoulders of these people. So I think that when they were written is important for if some of these prophecies could possibly have been told to be true or not, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. But it's also important who had access to which books, right? Because according to New Testament scholars, the first books may have been available to the later authors. And so that the stories are very similar, although not exactly the same, would make sense. Just from a literary storytelling point of view, like the story of Noah, right? We didn't know that there was a full story of Gilgamesh until the 1980s, when they discovered the tablets in what is now right? In Iraq. We found tablets that tell a story of a worldwide flood that was brought on by God for being unhappy. I don't know if you studied the laws of Hammurabi, but thou shalt not kill is on the laws of Hammurabi. And the Jews were in Babylon in 700. There seems to be quite a lot of evidence pointing to a number of times that the Jews of the time got stories from other cultures and just incorporated it into theirs. I've heard tell of something called the New Covenant. The laws that were in the Old Testament are partially and in some ways superseded by the New Covenant that Jesus supposedly brought. My question is, there are 613 commandments. I understand that there are things in the Old Testament that nobody is following. And I was just wondering, is there a good mechanism that I can point to when I'm thinking about it that allows you to discern between what is in the Old Covenant that I should not be listening to and what is in the Old Covenant that I should be listening to?
Yeah, not to say we do have our formulas, but it's not to say that we're going to be able to resolve every teaching in the Old Testament and whether it carries over. Just to give you the major overall rubric, the old covenant has been fulfilled by Jesus, and we are told in the new covenant that we shouldn't judge anybody based upon these ritualistic requirements, like which day do we worship the Sabbath, what food we eat, which holidays we're supposed to celebrate, because these things have all been fulfilled. In fact, they're called shadows or representations of Jesus Christ, who is the ultimate substance of everything that was written in the Old Testament. Everything was leading up to Jesus, the Savior. A couple of things that we continue to disagree upon is something called tithing. You know, in the Old Testament, it was laid out directly. You're supposed to give 10%. In the New Testament, it's been fulfilled and it's been transcended to an understanding that, you know, everything belongs to God. Our money has been a blessing by God. The time, our health, everything that we do is a blessing of God. And so, therefore, we have to be open to God's leading in regards to our money, the way we spend our time, how we direct our love, to whom we direct our love. And so it's not just, well, we're going to pay off God by paying 10%. And so, but people disagree about that. But about some of the things that you mentioned, Chris, there's some things we don't understand. Why not wear these two fabrics together? Why not plant this field with different seeds? And we don't know. And even there's an acknowledgement in the New Testament. Don't even debate over the law because there are things that are mysteries. We don't know everything. We have to understand the Old Testament through the lens of the New Testament.
I can't be in a conversation with someone who has your background and not ask about the problem of evil. For our viewers who don't know, the problem of evil is, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, how can he allow child cancer to exist? How can he allow horrible things to happen to innocent people? It's something that eats at me as a person. How do you justify the problem of evil?
Okay, I'm going to give you the general answer because every specific we can't answer. Like,
No.
why did God allow that tsunami? Or why did God allow the COVID? I can't say, but one thing I can say is that we need hardships and suffering in our life. I know I need it. I know that God is able to work these painful situations. I was talking about my panic attacks and depression that I experienced for decades. When I look back at it now, and I've been following the Lord for 44 years now, so I have a little bit of perspective. When I look back now, I can see that I needed to go through this stuff to burn out a lot of crap that was in me. I'm talking about bad ideas that were very self-serving, because how did I compensate for my depression? Generally, what people do is when they feel bad about themselves, they compensate by either their accomplishments, telling themselves, you see, I'm a really good person, or through positive affirmations. And I told myself a whole bunch of positive affirmations, like that everybody else is shit and I'm superior.
I'm sorry.
It is laughable. I think it's an appropriate response. And it's a human thing that we look down on other people. That's why we have these words called self-righteousness, pride, arrogance. This is so much endemic to the human condition. I lived in a fabricated world of distortion, alienated from myself, alienated from other people, and alienated from God. God can bring forth good from evil. In fact, we need the evil. I use myself as an example. I need the suffering. I need the suffering to come to terms with it. If it wasn't for the suffering, I would never examine myself. I would continue in the same distorted way that I had been continuing. And the suffering kind of opened my eyes up to things. And so we need suffering. We need death. So I see the curse in the Garden of Eden, the curse of the fall, that we would all die. I see this as, yes, it's a curse, but it's also a merciful curse. Why is it merciful? Because I know the way I am, and I take my relationships for granted. There are things about me I don't like. But the thing that helps me not to take things for granted is the realization I'm only going to have Anita here for a short period of time. And I want to appreciate her. I want to enjoy her. And that goes for so many aspects of our life, that we need the hardships. Just think of a life without hardships. We would harden ourselves and take everybody for granted because there are no consequences for taking them for granted or mistreating them. In this world, we have consequences, and they have to be painful consequences. We need the pain.
I cannot find in myself a justification for having an all-powerful deity that could create any world that they wanted to and create a world that has this in it.
You're putting your finger on an essential difference between us, between a Christian worldview and a naturalistic worldview. The Christian recognizes how little we know. And so a Christian wouldn't make such a judgment. But we trust, number one, I don't really have the knowledge, the vision, the intelligence to make that type of judgment. And what really gets me is that there are atheists who actually say, well, look, you can't make this argument for design. Look at the eye. Look at the crazy way that this is formed. It couldn't be possibly the product of design of an intelligent being. And I got to go, wait a sec. The eye is just so incredible that we see in present time, and the reactions undo and then do and undo at an incredible rate. It's an incredible organ. But yet people, based upon their worldview, come up with very different conclusions. Job had a very naturalistic conclusion. He went through terrible suffering and he blamed God. And he said, God has deprived me of justice and I want to talk to him. Well, God finally did talk to Job. And he asked Job a series of questions, like about 60 questions. And basic questions, not like the justice of God, which to decide what is just and unjust requires an incomplete understanding of all the factors. That's what Job was doing. But God asked him basic questions about how the world was created and all this stuff. And Job couldn't answer one of them. He got the point. And the point was, how can we bring a judgment against the creator of the universe when we know so little? We don't even know what light is, what matter is, what space is, what time is. We don't even know the basics of science. That should humble us.
Any creature that was a creator should be answerable to the mistakes he's made. For instance, the act of genocide, which God has not only okayed, but has himself taken part of, if the flood story is right. Here we have a deity who creates a world. Things are going wrong because he creates a world with beings in it that he gives free will and gives them the opportunity to mess up. And they mess up, and then he destroys them all and says, I want to start again. An omniscient God, a God who knows all and knows all from the beginning of time to the end of time, would have known that that was going to happen and might have thought, maybe not do that one. So once again, the inerrancy it just gets caught in my maw with things like that. Never mind the knowledge that we have now that there was a almost perfect identical story being told in Babylon, where the Jews were captive for 150 years and might have looked up to these people who had conquered them. Like you were saying, when you were like, yeah, Jeremiah is awesome because the Jews were winning and then they started losing. And the Jews felt the same way. Maybe they were, finally in a culture that was way more advanced than they were. And they started worshiping the ideas, if not the deities of that culture, and may have said, that's a great story. Let's put that one in. And, if we're going to have a code, wait, Hammurabi's got a code. Maybe we should make a code too. And a lot of the code actually maps pretty directly with some of the laws in Hammurabi's laws. So I'm not going to believe that the Bible is anything but a bunch of stories. And there's nothing's going to happen in this conversation where you're going to convince me or I'm going to convince you. I don't think that's what this conversation is about. And in general, I have no problem with people believing whatever they want to believe, but I do have a problem when that belief causes them to vote in certain ways and enact certain laws that impede the rights of other people with a righteousness that is only found in zealotry.
I can understand that you get pissed off with us because of the way we vote. I can understand that. And it's kind of like we're in an adversarial camp. But I would just invite you to look at our perspective that we might be getting pissed off at you guys.
I have no doubt you are. However, the way that I vote is not denying you the access to bathrooms if you are born in a body that you don't feel is the right gender, or
Uh,
denying gay people the right to marriage, or um, not that you are a member of a church that does, just denying people access to medical help because they believe that it goes against the word of God. And once again, I'm not putting that on you. I'm just saying there
well,
are groups
true. That's
who
true. We
believe
don't
that
want
type
to
of thing.
partake in an abortion or sex change surgery. That's true.
Yeah.
But we could say the same thing about you guys. You know, parents have been compelled to go along with sex changes of their kids. That you guys are voting in a way that no longer respects the right of the parents over their children.
If you were to ask me whether or not I was for compelling a parent to forcibly give hormone blockers or operations on their children against their will, I would say that is illegal, as you are the legal guardian and the children do not have a say until they're of legal age. However, if a child was to turn 18 and decide that they wanted to do all those things, I want there to be access to safe ways to do that.
Okay, that's a different story. Once they leave the house and they're not under parental authority, that's okay. The reasons that you're pissed off at us, we have equal reasons to be pissed off.
Yeah.
So look, we all have our grievances. Let's learn to respect one another despite these things.
I have a point of view about people who believe what I think is crazy batshit stuff. They think that what I think is crazy batshit too. So I'm not going to say to someone, look, I think you're batshit crazy. I'm going to say I disagree. But deep in my heart, I may think that.
Yeah, no, I know what
and
you
and
mean.
in the end, I'm sure that you're going to get off of this conversation. You're going to say, you know what, Chris? I think you're batshit crazy for not listening to this and hearing the sound of Jesus and now change your mind.
Well, that's the challenge that we all face. I can't watch the news anymore.
Mm.
I find it so disturbing. These issues they touch us so deeply that we want to kill, and that's a challenge to respect the dignity of each person, even though we see them as an enemy. I've got to deal with those feelings. When I see, especially in these Antifa, the violence, I want to grab a gun. I mean, that's my first reaction. I want to see justice done. When I watch a movie and I see justice done, I cry. That's how deep it is with me. And so I've got to fight that back.
If you would, for 1 week, change the source of your information flow from the people who agree with you to the people who disagree with you, and listen to a news source that you think is just nuts, I think what you'll find is that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and that the dog whistle of Antifa has been manipulated, and that it's not quite as bad as you've been told it is.
I would make the same challenge to you, but I don't know that I could, again, to listen to the news.
Listen to the BBC World News. We used to have a news. We got Walter Cronkite. He gets on, and for a half hour, he tells you what's happened. He doesn't then go to 7 hours of panels of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about or have an agenda, filling your ear with what they think. Why is their stuff more valuable than my stuff? I've actually been boycotting CNN. I watch Fox News once a week for a couple of hours just to find out what's going on there. But my main news source now is the BBC World News, which is a half hour on the hour. And it's not opinion and it's not talking heads. It's just the news. I watched Fox News and I listened to Rush Limbaugh and I listened to the people who I completely disagree with because I want to know what they're thinking.
It's a great challenge. It is. I just don't know if I'm up to that.
that's
I don't.
that's fair.
I don't
That's
even watch Fox. I can't stand. I can't stand to see the videos
yeah.
of Antifa beating the snot out of somebody and knocking them unconscious. I can't stand it.
We have to be very careful about what we believe when we're seeing stuff, because things are being manipulated not just by Americans, but by other people who want us to not trust each other.
That's true. And
So
maybe you can even put the BBC into that category too.
they're not giving you opinion. They're just saying this happened from a neutral point of view. If you're going to try to find a news source that's not at all corrupted in any way by any bias, I think that's inhumane. That's not possible. You're not going to find it. But you try to find as many sources as possible. If you can't stand the news, just watch the half hour once a day for a week. And I'd like to hear what you think, Daniel.
You guys have been very good. You've given me the opportunity to talk. I think you've all been very fair, and I appreciate that. It's been a great experience.
Daniel, thank you so much for your kind time and your participation. And I look forward to speaking with you again, either on or off camera. This is Chris West from When Humanists Attack, and that is all for tonight.